So, you have one of these things where like the science is saying one thing and then the entire policy infrastructure of the United States is saying it completely the opposite. And at the same time, proclaiming loudly that they're following the science. The irony was just, it was too
Yeah.
hard to take.
So I'm going to trot out this theory, and I'll try to make it really quick. 2003 SARS, China did China stuff. There was not. I don't think there was Twitter. I don't think there was a penetration. I don't think there was much travel out of China, and they did, presumably draconian stuff in China. The people were revolting, as the expression goes, as Marie Antoinette might have said. And so they were pushing people from town to town. So like they took infected people and they put them out to the countryside, say, or I don't know, vice versa, whatever. And so certain of these towns that were on the receiving end of the illness, they literally protested. They were in the streets, and this is not well popularized. But China, having had Tiananmen Square virus in the late 90s, they did not want to experience. Late 80s. They did not want to experience this. I think it was 89. 14 years later, they did not want to experience Tiananmen Square again and be on the precipice of their own power. So they are insecure up at the top. They control the place, but nobody really likes them. And so when people started being in the street and rioting, they brought out riot gear. And so with that knowledge, that institutional memory in China, I think they're always not necessarily fighting the coronavirus. I think they're fighting the Hong Kong, flu, which is the Hong Kong freedom flu. And so that's embedded in them. And I'm wondering, so here's kind of a question. I'm wondering whether we, sort of use this as a governmental bludgeon to get rid of our virus, which was Donald Trump, say, according, not for my taste, but according to some. And this was all done for some kind of secondary means, A, and B, was it potentially also done as a kind of regulatory capture aspect to, bring in this new modality of life-saving mRNA treatment, which we could make an experiment. We try to keep everyone naive for the duration. So you can take either one or both.
Okay, so actually you had three things there. So one is SARS-1. SARS-1 is interesting because I think the key thing about SARS-1 is that it wasn't particularly well adapted for human transmission. It spread by fomites. It's from what I understand. For some people, there's still some debate about how it spread. But there was an outbreak in Toronto, outbreak in China, and whatever. And they I think a small local temporary lockdown or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what. I mean, it wasn't like severe. They put up in airports they checked your temperature, right? That was it. And a few other things. And basically the disease went away because it doesn't spread very easily. It's a very different situation than from COVID. I think partly people in the early days of the pandemic, a lot of public health people were thinking it maybe spreads just like SARS-1 and that it would go away just like SARS-1 did. Without actually looking at the data or the evidence. It's much less lethal than SARS-1, for instance. That was clear from the earliest times. The question of the political uses of the pandemic and the commercial uses of the pandemic, I generally, Randy, I don't think that these were like primary drivers of public health decision making. I do think that there were a lot of opportunistic people who took advantage of the chaos for their own ends. Certainly, I think that's true for political actors like the Democratic Party. I think definitely in the United States used it. Trump's, frankly, like his confused reaction in some ways to the pandemic, and in particular the chaos around the lockdowns to their own political ends. I don't think it's weirdly non-ideological, right? So you have a Swedish socialist government not locking down. You have a right-wing UK government locking down. You have an American right-wing government locking down. But within the states, it's right-wing governors like Ron DeSantis not locking down. You have left-wing governors like the Gavin Newsom in California locking down. So it's just, the politics of it are very strange. Certainly very opportunistic, and certainly it had the effect of undermining Donald Trump's presidency. As far as like the mRNA platform, And again, I think as one of these opportunistic things, right? So you have the President Trump saying like, let's develop a vaccine rapidly, Operation Warp Speed. Let's pour huge amounts of money into it. We'll have purchase guarantees. So even if the trials don't come out right, we'll still pay you for the vaccine because it's worth the bet. Even if it comes out wrong, at least we've tried. And if it works, then it'll solve the problem, right? That was the idea of Operation Warp Speed. For the pharmaceutical companies, that's a fantastic deal, right? They have essentially a guaranteed market, whatever happens in the trial. Normally, the trial is the big unknown in terms of the financial viability of products, right? If the trial doesn't work out, you can't sell the product. But here you have Operation Warp Speed, means you can sell the product even if the trial doesn't work out. The trial works out sort of. The products get sold. The mRNA technology, it wasn't obvious that was the right platform to use. That technology had been around for like a decade or two and had failed in other settings like cancer treatments and whatnot. So it was kind of a surprise that it worked. Other vaccine makers around the world used a very different technology. In the UK, the big technology was that AstraZeneca used was this adenovirus vector vaccines. Mm-hmm. There's Novavax in the U.S., which is these protein subunit vaccines, which is more similar to what was used in India, for instance.
Right.
So there was a wide range of technologies. There was a big fight and a race among vaccine makers about what the right technology should be. mRNA is, I think, mostly famous because it's the United States that doubled down and invested in it. In fact, we had an adenovirus vector vaccine, the J&J vaccine, that the public health moved to suppress very early on in April 2021. Looking at the mRNA technology, and I've seen like clips of someone like Bill Gates talk about it. He talks about it as if it's software. You just put the code in, and you have a platform which is the hardware, which is the mRNA, and then you can then use it to like program up any vaccine you want or any protein you want to produce in any cell you like. It sounds like a fantastic vision, but the problem is like the body's complicated. It just doesn't work like software, hardware. It doesn't work exactly like that. The analogy,
I think his might.
He's not a robot. Even he's human, Randy. I think the problem is like it's not, the body is a very you're a physician, of course you know this. Like the body is a very complicated thing. We are not while we have analogies to software and hardware where we just program, we're not actually like that. Right. And very, very unpredictable things happen when you put a chemical or a drug or whatever in people's body.
That this mystifies me. I get that they would want to maybe piggyback on the opportunity, but I don't see why it couldn't have been, an isolated quasi-voluntary fragment of the population rather than pushing this new modality on everybody with, no obviously impossibility of any long-term data because there had not been any long-term. And then moreover, to give it to people who have a very long-term ahead of them, i.e. children. My mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, was alive during the whole thing, and she died a few months ago, literally living in our house. And we cared for her. We were, we had the Bhattacharya, Kulldorff, Gupta doctrine here, and even so, we, she was of advanced age then. And I don't think she would have wanted, and I asked her this at various occasions, to put her grandchildren's lives on hold, their potential dating and mating and greeting and meeting and collegiate learning and so forth on hold, so she could get an extra X, a number of months and so forth on the tail end. Nonetheless, she loved herself some vaccines. She wanted to have each and every one of them, and I'm fine with that, because if there are long-term problems, well, guess what? She doesn't have a long-term in either case, and so be it, and so did the vaccines help her? I have no idea. They helped her maybe emotionally. That's fine. And the people who wanted them, they could have had them. And I think the vaccines, I'm pro-vaccine. I think they're wonderful, but ordinarily they're given in advance of an illness, never so much on the tail end of it. So I guess a question would be here, were the vaccines pushed kind of irresponsibly after the major wave of ancestral SARS-CoV-2 had disappeared, when the subsequent VOCs, Greek letter, strains had come by, and they were not the original monster?
Yeah, so that's a complicated question. So first, in terms of the age stratification and the use of the proper use of the vaccines, I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in December of 2020, arguing that we should use the vaccines for focus protection. The reason not and Martin Kulldorff and I wrote an article in The Hill in 2021, April 2021, I think, or May 2021, saying that it wasn't really wise to use it in children, for reasoning exactly along the lines you just said, because we don't know what the long-term effects are. And also that the marginal benefit on children was going to be small because the risk of COVID, from dying from COVID, is so small in children. And I think that would have been a reasonable strategy, right? To recommend the vaccines for older people, and then not recommend it for younger people unless they had some particular condition. To just tell people to go talk to your doctor, and not put social pressure on doctors to like come down one way or the other on its use. In December 2020, what evidence was there? There was a randomized trials, right? And I'm sure you looked at them, Randy, like as I did. They had, as an outcome, they had the prevention of symptomatic infection for 2 months. Okay, well, symptomatic infection is not the same thing as blocking disease transmission. We don't even know in December 2020 whether the vaccine would stop disease transmission. But we knew that it would block symptomatic infection for 2 months. So I reasoned that if it blocks symptomatic infection, it probably also reduces the risk of severe disease, dying from it. They didn't check that as an outcome directly, but it seemed like a reasonable inference. So that's why I recommended people take the vaccine, especially older people take the vaccine. I was actually frankly relieved when my mom took it in April of 2021. And I think it probably, if you do the math right, you probably did save the lives of older people that took the vaccine. Now, it's turned out that it has some side effects, but those side effects I don't think offset on net the benefit for the vaccine for people that are, say, over the age of 70. You can pick some age. I'm not know the exact number. Yeah. For younger people, the calculus is very different. The mortality risk from COVID is much lower. And it turns out the vaccine does not stop transmission. So you're not getting huge benefit. And I think a lot of people in public health misread the evidence. They thought the vaccines, like other vaccines in widespread use, do stop transmission, would stop transmission. And then for them, it was an absolute shock that there were people, younger people especially, that didn't want the vaccine, because for them, for privately, it wasn't that big a benefit. They thought they were being irresponsible to the public at large by not taking the vaccine, when in fact, all they were doing was doing the right cost-benefit calculation for themselves, that it wasn't worthwhile. Now, the thing is, if you want a vaccine to be successful, when you recommend it, it should be both beneficial on net to the person you're recommending it to and on net beneficial to society at large. Both have to be really true if you're going to have a successful vaccine. This vaccine only met one of those criteria, net beneficial and only to a subset of the population, older people. It didn't meet the criteria of protecting others. So if I'm vaccinated, I don't protect you from getting COVID. You could still get COVID from me, because people who get the vaccine can get and spread COVID. So therefore, there was never any public justification. And yet public health, misreading this evidence, turned the vaccination into this distinction between clean and unclean people. If you're unvaccinated, you're unclean. So unclean that you should be excluded from society. You should lose your job. You shouldn't be allowed to enter public library. You shouldn't be allowed to travel on public transportation. You should be shunned, such that your relatives won't even invite you to Thanksgiving. Public health endorsed all that on the basis, again, of a faulty reading of the evidence, and as a result, I think pushed public division in a way that only public health uniquely can. This distinction between clean and unclean is a very powerful force in the human psyche
and in human history. I imagine your ancestors are from India, and there's a caste system there, and some are cast out and cast off, and there are I forget the name that they have for the unclean. Yeah, maybe you'll tell me, but that certain job, what is it?
Dalit.
Yeah, that certain jobs are only going to go to that class, and certain classes will never do those jobs. And getting back to the other F word, not the the curse word, but the fascist word. Clearly, the Germans made hay and more out of public health measures to cast unclean the Jews. And there were all kinds of posters at the time that they were disease mongers. They were, they would, basically cartoonize them into, caricature them into, vermin. And this was a public health measure. It was a public health measure to get rid of, and it was metaphoric as well as real. It was, they were banding about that there were real diseases as well as the metaphoric disease of this scourge of society. And then this is where, public health is, has a fault line. You're out in California, where they are not necessarily the brave warriors that they put themselves out to be. Oftentimes, they are the co-opted mercenaries of politics. And Publius, from word from the people, the same derivation of the word politics, public health, has a political aspect to it. And I think that it's far ingrained, the politics within those in public health. And there is a kind of a political movement to make things happen a certain way by doing certain things. And that's a terrible intro. I apologize. But, I'll give you one quick anecdote. I was at the American Public Health Association meeting very briefly because my old cherished professor, Theodore Brown, was there, and he's still around in his 80s. And we met in Boston. And so I had occasion to hang out at the Westin Hotel or something like that. And this is not that long ago, a few months ago, and everybody at the meeting, indoors, outdoors, they're all masked. And so this was a kind of a funny thing. And I think it became, getting back to politics, it became a badge. There's the scarlet letter to cast somebody out. And there's the Sneetches, I don't know if you know Dr. Seuss, where they have the star on their belly or not. And these are our markers. And getting back to the star, obviously the Jews had the star, it was bad. The Sneetches had the star, it was good. And we have visual signifiers that give us this caste system. And this caste of characters within the public health, they were all of the mask are awesome variety. And only, barely to sip their coffee would they pull it down and fleetingly. It was an amazing thing. And again, it was just a couple months ago. Maybe you can talk a little bit about masks, the masquerade, the Cochrane report recently, how well this is diffused, how much masking is going on. I know Massachusetts, for outpatient visits, doctors and patients and everybody, staff, all have to wear a mask. How long is it going to go on? And speaking of how long it's going to go on, how much more time can you avail yourself?
I'm good for time.
Okay.
The public health emergency was just ended today, Randy. I mean, the World Health Organization declared May 5th, I guess, the end of the public health emergency for COVID. It's interesting. A lot of healthcare systems are lifting up the mask mandates. I still saw a report. Apparently, there's a North Carolina school that closed because they found some COVID cases yesterday. And they closed to clean up the place and spray Lysol everywhere or whatever today. So it's like you remember at the end of World War II, you still had Japanese soldiers in remote islands fighting.
I bring those up all the time. Yeah, for a while I knew the guy's name. They actually caused a lot of damage. They were sitting in this island in the Philippines, and there was a band of them originally, and then they kind of petered out over time and age and whatnot. And they were told many, many, many times that the war was over. And they were dropped leaflets and all this kind of stuff. And they were killing the local Filipinos and stealing their pigs and whatnot. They were murderous, and they were marauding, and they were dangerous. So they were dangerous to the population while they were still carrying on this war, obviously. And it took a Japanese delegation. Then the first Japanese delegation came along. The guy wouldn't believe me. He said, I need to see somebody from the emperor. And the emperor's, sent a minion with a special sign, sealed, wax, encrusted with his ring, whatever. And then the guy gave it up. And that was like 1963. So he carried this on, marauding in the hills. So it wasn't just Don Quixote like, fanciful and cute. He was damaging. Having this carry on was damaging. He was actually lauded. He became a member of the Diet, the parliament in Japan. So he was actually became a popular figure afterwards. Sorry about that. But yes, the Japanese soldiers carrying on. Sorry to ruin your train of thought.
No worries. I mean, I think many healthcare systems actually have dropped the mask mandates, even within the healthcare systems. And what we're seeing is like there's a few that have held on to it. I think actually, if you'd asked me a year ago, would healthcare systems ever drop the mask mandates, I would have predicted mostly no. So this outcome has surprised me. What we are seeing is like there's some like long COVID groups that are protesting the dropping of the mask mandates in healthcare settings. Again, I think because they're misreading the evidence about the efficacy of masks. I do think that, like, in healthcare, there are reasonable times and places for masks by trained people, right? So you ask surgeons to wear masks so that they don't have, spittle into surgical fields. That they don't, the masks are quite good at stopping droplets. What they're not good at is stopping, especially people who wear masks that don't know really how to wear them with low quality masks. Stopping aerosol spread of a highly infectious respiratory disease. And so, like, I think a lot of people, they listen to public health, were essentially misled about the science of masking regarding how much what you could expect them to get from wearing a low quality mask in a loose way. Then again, public health used that to or permitted a moralization to happen around it, where like you now can tell the difference between someone who's empathic and not empathic based just simply on whether they're wearing a mask or not, which is ridiculous. And as a consequence, it's not surprising that you get this like Japanese soldiers, like the end of the war Japanese soldier syndrome, because a lot of people were misled by public health. It's unfortunate, but I don't I got the prediction wrong a year ago if they would go on forever. Now I'm predicting I don't think it'll last that much longer, maybe another, but there may be people who
I
hold
don't
on
know.
to it forever.
I don't know. I hang out with a lot of credentialed people. I'm only practicing minimally right now. I'm writing and whatnot, but at my tennis club, for instance, and my other tennis club, there are a lot of MDs and MD PhDs and MD MPHs and all this kind of stuff, and they're super masked. I mean, still. And at my congregation, ditto. Not everybody. It's like a funny thing, and I just don't know. The Japanese soldier, I'll give him a little bit of slack because he's up on a mountaintop. He didn't have the internet, and he didn't have newspapers, and he didn't have information, and he didn't, he was, I guess, distrustful and whatnot, and he was, getting by. But these guys do, and these are our knowledge intelligentsia. And I was the one, kind of the invasion of the body snatchers. At the end, I don't know if you watched the movie where, Kevin McCarthy, whatever, they're yelling, screaming at, I was the one who was unclean for, wanting to play tennis outdoors at all, and I was the one endangering lives. I mean, these are all people who don't smoke and are lean, whatever, and they're not at risk. And if you are at risk, please, stay home. I mean, that's certainly an option. You can focus your own protection however you like, but at their own jobs, they're still all masked. And I ask them now and then, like, are you good with that? It's, oh yeah, it's not a big deal. I mean, I don't know, maybe, I never really liked fluorescent lights. I don't know if I'm super sensitive, but I don't really like wearing masks. And I actually think, as a physician, I was doing urgent care a few months ago. I think it takes away from the interaction. I mean, it's like, we are full facial frontal beings, and we get all kinds of visual cues, and you're taking away, 70, 80% of them. I mean, you can see people's eye lines, I guess, but it's not the same. You can't establish a rapport. And I had my own medical practice, just primary care, 27 years. And then I'm doing this at somebody else's clinic, and it's a totally weird thing for me. I mean, obviously I like to talk a little bit, but I think it's not just that I like to talk. I think that relationships are built through communication, and you're just taking this all away. You're making people into, chips or whatever. I mean, it's not the way things work.
I agree with you. I think there are definitely harms to masking, many of which are, of this relational kind of thing. Like it sends a signal of fear, of panic. It sends a signal that I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to. I'm so much like I'm gonna hide my mouth, and it makes it much more difficult to establish relationships. Like, because a lot of how we convey the idea that we care about somebody else is through our mouths, through our faces, through our expressions, and masks block that. That's a really important thing, which public health decided, I guess, wasn't that important during the pandemic. I think a lot of the masking religion, masking cult is kind of, it requires reinforcement by public health and authorities. And when that reinforcement goes away, a lot of that craziness also, I think, go away. It's kind of the flip side of like the panic mongering that the authorities did during the pandemic. Once you did the lockdown and you told people that this was 3-4% mortality risk of disease, people are going to the public health authorities are saying that people then perceive it to be the Black Plague. It's going to 20%, 30%, 40% risk of death in these surveys, and you're going to treat people like they're biohazards. I mean that, and then you have public health reinforcing that. That's one dynamic. I think what we're about to, now that the public health emergency is officially over, the dynamic will go in the other direction. That a lot of the people that were essentially playing out their germophobic fantasies they're gonna start to stop getting reinforcement from the authorities, and it'll mostly just die away. It'll be a social contagion that'll die away. That's my prediction. You can hold me to it maybe a year from now. You can see if I was right or wrong.
So social contagion. I don't know if I heard that correctly or not. I just want to segue. Maybe we'll tail off soon, but Stanford and other universities. I had on just the other day Laurens Boyce, who's a professor. He's a gender studies professor in Amsterdam at they call it UVA, the University of Amsterdam, and he's has a whistleblower case against them. He's being shunted and quieted because he thinks he's a gay man and he's a leftist politically. But I think we might have mentioned that being mugged oftentimes changes your view of the world, and so he's been shouted down because they're thinking that he is against this trans concept, and I don't want to get into all of that. But what's going on with the university? How have they accepted you and or free speech in general? I know I saw an article in Tablet on this topic. Maybe you could speak to that if you choose.
Sure. So I think I'll just speak to my own personal experience rather than sort of a general thing. I work at Stanford University. It's one of the best universities in the world. I love the place. I've been at Stanford since I was 18 years old. It made me who I am. I think it is an absolutely wonderful institution. One of the things I loved the most about the place was its motto. Its motto is "Let the winds of freedom blow." And for 33 years, I thought that Stanford took that motto very seriously. That was part of the ethos of what Stanford was about. During the pandemic, Stanford failed to live up to that motto. It would actively suppress the free speech of people who disagreed with the COVID consensus. It made the lives of, including me, of people who were essentially speaking out, saying, "Look, these pandemic policies are a big mistake," into a living hell. It turned my life into it was a hostile work environment. At one point during the pandemic, students put posters up around the university. I don't know, actually, I say students. I don't know it was students. I don't know which group was what it was. Which is in effect, made me feel physically threatened to walk onto campus. 100 of my colleagues in the medical school signed a secret petition that they circulated, that they were going to send to the president of the university to try to silence me, because I'd said in a public roundtable with Governor DeSantis that masking children had no high quality evidence behind it, which is true. And so you had it wasn't just that they. It'd be one thing if they disagreed with me, that then we could hold a seminar and we could have a discussion, right? That would be what the winds of freedom blowing would look like. No, they circulated a secret petition, which two of my friends leaked to me, asking the president of the university to silence me. So you have a university that, and it's still to this day, as there's not been one COVID policy seminar at Stanford that I've been invited to. The former president of the university in December of 2020 tried to organize a debate between me and somebody on the other side. Nobody accepted. You had Scott Atlas, who was the president's advisor, President Trump's advisor. You had 100, again, of my colleagues signing a vicious letter in effect accusing him of being against hand washing, which was a lie. And it was rather than seeking to like engage with them. I mean, he has a very difficult job. He's advising the president of the United States. And okay, if they don't agree with some piece of advice he's giving, at least engage with the actual advice he's giving. Try to figure out what he's about rather than slandering him and destroying him. The faculty senate voted in effect. I mean, I don't know what else to call it, to excommunicate Scott. They couldn't fire him, but they sanctioned him. It is a black mark on the reputation of Stanford University that it did that. It made it so that anybody on the Stanford faculty that goes and gives advice to political leaders should watch their backs, because Stanford won't is no longer an environment where that you can do that freely. Again, I'm not against debate or criticism. It's fine. Everyone has the right to do that. But that wasn't what they were doing. They were using the power of and the prestige of a major university, one of the world's best, to destroy the lives of faculty that dissented from the opinions of other faculty. It should never have happened, and it is a collapse of academic freedom at Stanford. Until that's addressed, I don't see how anybody should trust the research that comes out of Stanford or trust the institution itself to live up to its mission.
So we have Dr. Ioannidis and Dr. Bhattacharya there. Are you tenured? Does it help you? How do you get your strength, and how do you maintain your scientific and moral compass?
So yeah, I am tenured. So that definitely helps. If I was not tenured, I would have been fired, I'm certain. Many young people at Stanford have written to me, telling me that they agreed with me, but they kept their mouths shut because they were afraid. Again, that's a symptom of the failure of protection of academic freedom at Stanford. I don't like. I mean, Randy, I don't view a lot of academics. They view like their position as like the source of their success. I don't. The tenure and position at Stanford is fine. I mean, it's good. It's a blessing, but it's not the source of what I view as like my success is to do with like my my kids are doing well. I'm I can go and practice my faith well. I can love my family well, my neighbor well. I love my friends well. I can do my work, which is to work on to do research on health policy, on epidemiology, on a whole host of topics, and write about it. Those I view as important to me, but the position itself is not the source of my success. I don't view it as like a lot of people in academics view their job as their identity, and I've never viewed it that way. It's just a job. I love the university, but that's because I love the people in the university. I love the fact that it's an institution that once was devoted to the discovery of truth and the dissemination of truth. And the teaching of and training of the next generation of people to love the truth, and I think so. To me, the collapse of academic freedom at Stanford is a source of great sadness, but it's not. And the attacks on me by people at Stanford are not. I mean, they're attacking some. I mean, if I viewed my social status as the main thing I cared about in my life, it would have crushed me. I would have stayed silent. That's why a lot of academics stayed silent, because that's how they view their self-worth as connected to their social status inside the university or inside the academic world. But it's not to me. I think that protected me. That this idea that this is something it's a blessing to be a professor at Stanford University, but it's not who I am really. There's no like central to who I am. That was really important.
So I watch sports. I usually DVR them so I can watch an hour game in an hour-ish. And the nice thing about it, I was a math kind of student, science student. And what I liked about that and about sports is that there is a conclusion. There's an answer. There's a right and a wrong. Maybe in 1984, you can have 2 + 2 = 5 because the state says so. But ordinarily, the truth has a vote. And so you can't argue your team is better when they lost. They lost the game. That's it. I think there are clear scores here. There are clear winners and losers. There's clear theory. But I don't see that anyone's announcing or acknowledging their wrongitude. I made up that word. On one particular level, I'm going to give a self-promotion here. I wrote an article last year on is it time to acknowledge that Omicron is not COVID-19? And I don't care what you call Omicron. You could call it Corona 22 or the common Corona or Omicron 23, whatever you want to call it, but it's not COVID-19. Genetically, it is a coronavirus, yes, but it's not a lineal descendant of the VOCs, alpha, beta, delta, gamma, so forth, kappa, lambda of the SARS-CoV-2, nor a direct descendant of ancestral SARS-CoV-2. And we'll leave aside the derivation, whether it's a lab leak and whatnot. But Omicron is akin to the common colds that always popped up as coronavirus. And the fact that the testing, people still test for COVID-19, they show up positive, even though it's Omicron's not SARS-CoV-2. Does this point out that if we keep testing, we're going to keep finding coronavirus and then keep misapplying it as COVID-19 when, according to my watch, it's 2023?
Okay, so we talk about like the definition of what SARS-CoV-2 is. I probably disagree with about that, but I think that's not and I'm sure you agree, that's not the key thing. The key thing is whatever the virus that is circulating, whatever we want to call it, what are its clinical effects in a population that is not immune naive to it? Mm-hmm. That's really I think the heart of what you're trying to get at, and that I completely agree with. This is a very different population that this version of the virus is meeting than the version of the virus that the population met in March of 2020 or January 2020. It's meeting a population that for the most part, now of course with their exceptions, when it meets that virus, it produces a relatively mild illness. And what that means is, still, and that was true, of course, for children in March of 2020, right? It was mainly the elderly that were suffering, and you can, that I think is still true for this virus. It still has this very, very steep age gradient in terms of its effects. Except now you basically need to be, it's a very, very different situation than it was in March of 2020. Even in March of 2020, the idea of doing mass asymptomatic testing was a very dangerous thing. The idea was that we could somehow figure out who has it secretly and then quarantine them and then that'll stop the disease from spreading. That clearly failed. In March of 2020, May 2023, the idea that we should test asymptomatically so that we disrupt the lives of regular people who show no symptoms whatsoever. So in a futile bid to stop this virus from spreading all around, is insane. This virus is going to be spreading all around for all of eternity. We should not be restructuring our lives and our societies around the suppression of the spread of this virus.
Now, getting to the part about the baseball game or the football game, are there scores? And will we get an honest accounting of the score? For my taste, I think we never can, because people are intent, perennially begging the question, which is not what people think it means. Petitio principi, which they're using false presumptions to come up with their conclusions, and they state them as such. And we see this in the debate I think you had with Sten Vermond. But they don't start with the basic premise of the exact mortality and danger of the virus to begin with, and then they transmute whatever the data they want. It's hard to get winners and losers, to figure it out. I mean, I don't know that we're playing on the same playing field or following the same rules. I'm not expecting the Nuremberg trials. I'm not expecting the Truth and Reconciliation thing. But what's the denouement? Is it going to happen in court, or is it going to happen anywhere?
So I wrote a document with 7 of my friends called the Norfolk Group document. It's a blueprint for what an honest COVID commission will look like. Now, we've seen some COVID commissions start issuing the reports, but none of them are honest in the sense that they don't actually address your question, which is what worked, what didn't work, squarely. Yeah, so the Norfolk Group document is like 80 pages of questions, scientific questions on the efficacy of various strategies followed, the scientific basis for those strategies, and so on. Unless you have a commission that actually honestly addresses those questions, you're not gonna get a denouement that's widely accepted. But I think the public has started to understand that something went deeply wrong during the pandemic. And like, I think if you're going to ask the people who made the crazed pandemic response, designed it, the architects of it, they'll give themselves awards. They've been doing that. It's fine, they can do that. But it's not. I don't think that very many people are fooled. Sweden won the war in that sense. Like the Swedish strategy worked.
Yeah.
People see that. It's really hard to like deny that.
No, it's almost like Monty Python. The ones who weren't hammering their own heads. This would be a joke. Why do you bang your head against the wall? It says, well, it feels good when I stop.
So the answer to your question more broadly, I don't see. I wouldn't have said this 2 years ago. Certainly, I wouldn't have said this 3 years ago, and I might have started to think it a year ago. But now I really believe this. I don't see any alternative than some political denouement. Like, there has to be some political price to be paid, and it won't be by the architects of the plans. It'll be by the price will be paid by the political parties that supported the lockdown policies. And the other thing that's funny about the political denouement of it won't necessarily be articulated that it was lockdowns themselves that were the reason for the political consequences of it. Right. So you're going to see probably the earliest example of this is Andrew Cuomo. Right. He sends COVID infected patients to nursing homes, resulting in the needless deaths of countless people in New York. And he's ousted not because of that mistake. No, it was something else. It was almost like a psychological displacement. Like, people couldn't admit to themselves that they'd been done something so monstrous.
I think that's how they get rid of problematic Democrats. They bring up something completely different. And
it was not just, by the way, it was not just Democrats that did. I mean, remember, Donald Trump was he instituted the lockdowns. I think, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who declared herself early in the pandemic as the single source of truth and locked the island down. It's effectively a prison colony for I don't know how long. She resigns. Why? Doesn't say exactly. Wants to spend more time
at Harvard now.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure these people will have fantastic awards given to them and all that. The justice doesn't work that way, but they won't have power. And I think one by one, Boris Johnson, right, locks the country down. Why does he leave? Because he held a party during COVID, not because of the lockdown. I mean,
they should have gotten Gavin Newsom by that same standard. Should have lost his recall. So
yeah, well, California is a special case. We enjoy hitting ourselves on the head over and over again. I'm very bad at politics, Randy. I don't predict politics well, but I think there's an iron law of karma here that will play itself out, and whether it'll be entirely satisfying to people who oppose the lockdowns, I don't know. But I do think that aside from that political denouement, that the new political environment, whatever it is, we have to make sure that it's very unfriendly to the processes that led to the lockdowns and the crazed pandemic response. A lot of states are doing this. They're passing laws that make it so, for instance, like World Health Organization declarations are not binding in the state. A lot of political transformation is happening to limit the power of public health, because what we've seen is public health has tremendous power to upend our democracies. And so that's going to be a big fight over the next few years. How do we do that? And a lot of it will not necessarily be front page news, but it'll be very, very important.
Yeah. Now, I think part of the granuloma that was formed around you was seeing you as the virus in the body politic, and your words would be, yelling fire in a crowded theater, or giving the keys to the atomic bomb or whatever, that your words would be so damaging that it would cause death. That's the presumption. That's the thing that they have, that they can use and spread. And it was doubly shameful that the Twitterati and our metaverse leaders, so easily fell in line with this. Anyway, I think that I've been in your debt today. I want to give you an opportunity to make closing words and or carry on, whatever you like. Your thoughts.
Well, Randy, I think we've finally, I think, reached the end, the official end. But there is going to be a post-pandemic reckoning. The nature of it won't be Nuremberg. It won't be satisfying the people who oppose the pandemic. It won't be satisfying the people who are in favor of the lockdowns and so on. But I think we have to reform our public health system so it cannot have the power to do this kind of thing again, at least without vastly better evidence. We need to include a very larger set of expertise and people inside public health decision making. It turns out it's a very narrow group of people who have this tremendous power. And we have to work toward making our political systems more resilient and recommitment to the basic tenets of liberal ideas. Free speech, free exchange of ideas, free association, freedom of movement, and so on. So that even our judicial and political systems are not susceptible as they were during the pandemic. We have a lot of work still left to do, and it won't be nearly as sexy or near the front page, but it's still, I think, quite important work.
Well, thank you, Jay. I just want to take 1 minute of your time. I do my shameless self-promotion at the end here, and I'm going to have you just hang around for a second. This is my book, Overturning Zika, The Pandemic That Never Was. You can help support this podcast by going to Amazon and purchasing it. You don't have to read it. You should read it. You don't have to, but it would help if you purchase it. And my stellar news now is that it's coming out in Brazil. It's being published by a major publisher there, Viseu, and it's I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, so I'll leave it right there. But our Portuguese friends can take a stab at this. Pandemia que nunca existiu, Zika. It's basically deconstructing Zika. I'll leave it there. And so I'm very heartened by that. We'll save our Zika talk for another day. I appreciate your having read my article. I'm going to send you a copy of the book. If you know anybody who can review it, or our listeners out there, if you know somebody who'd like to review the book, is reviewed in Daily Skeptic recently by Dr. Roger Watson. And I commend you to read that because it is an independent viewpoint on that. And Dr. Bhattacharya tweeted it out a few months ago, and I'm in your debt for that as well. So thank you so much for sticking around. I'm really honored to be with you. I learned so much every time I talk with you, and God bless you, and I hope you continue on being you. And again, as a professor, you're wonderful, but I think you'd be wonderful even without that. And I think really it comes down to keeping your authentic voice and saying what you see. And keeping a clear eye. And so that is a wonderful thing. I'm going to close with one comment I read recently from Henry Kissinger. He was talking about X, Y, and Z, and he said, and he's a diplomat, so they don't always deal in truth. And he said, and it has the additional value of actually being true. Because they'll say a lot of stuff. And he said, and this has the additional value of being true. So I would put that maybe as my epitaph if I'm not planning on dying, but if it happens, hopefully somebody put that up there. But I think you're a truth teller as well. So I'm very pleased and honored to have had you on my show.
Thank you, Randy. Really grateful to know you too. Take care now.
Perfect.